Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. History doesn't remember the loudest. It remembers the ones who refused to stay where they were placed. From the moment you decided you weren't going to die in the narrative they wrote for you, something shifted in the spiritual atmosphere. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, and it definitely didn't come with theme music, though honestly, your life deserved a soundtrack by now. What happened was far more shocking. You stopped cooperating with the version of you they thought they could control. And that's when the whispers started. The debates, the long group chats at 2 a.m., the sudden experts trying to decode your existence like you were a season finale they couldn't predict. Psychologists call it identity dissonance. The moment people see you break a pattern they counted on, their brains actually feel threatened. That's why they kept talking about you, not because you were interesting, but because your evolution disrupted their comfort zone like a plot twist they didn't approve of. You lived through storms that were supposed to end your story, and somehow you came back with better posture, sharper discernment, and this new glow that had people asking, wait, who told them they could level up without permission? Your comeback wasn't just a recovery. It was a violation of the role they assigned you. You were meant to lose quietly, not fight back strategically. You were supposed to fold, not rise with receipts, clarity, and a spiritual rank they didn't even know you carried. And let's be honest, you didn't just fight back. You rearranged the entire storyline. You responded in ways that made people pull up their invisible binoculars, trying to figure out how you went from easy target to historic comeback. Even your silence started making them nervous. Not the silence speaks louder cliché, but the kind of silence that means, I'm reloading my destiny, please hold. You didn't come back to prove a point. You came back to take your place. And the moment you did, the entire environment lit up with conversation, speculation, and people pretending they always knew you'd win. Sure, the truth is, chosen one, you didn't just fight back. You fought back so powerfully that your comeback became a reference point, an event, a moment, a shift, something people will talk about long after the ones who doubted you stopped pretending they weren't watching. Now let's dissect exactly how you fought back and how you ended up making history while they were busy underestimating you. Number one, they talked because they never expected you to respond, with strategy instead of emotion. People are always confident when they think they can predict you. They study your reactions, they memorize your triggers, and they assume they already know exactly how you'll respond when they push certain buttons. That's why they moved so boldly against you. They thought they were dealing with the old version of you, the one who reacted fast, felt deeply, and carried every blow personally. They expected you to blow up, break down, defend yourself endlessly, or crumble under the pressure they created. But what they didn't see coming was your evolution into someone who thinks before moving and observes before engaging. Your strategy shocked them because it wasn't flashy or emotional. It wasn't some dramatic comeback filled with anger or revenge. You simply shifted into a level of clarity that made their chaos ineffective. You began choosing your responses instead of reacting out of hurt. You stopped trying to prove your worth and started showing it quietly. You replaced emotion with analysis, and that alone changed the entire game. You weren't responding just to respond. You were responding to win. They started talking because your calmness put them in confusion. They weren't prepared to deal with someone who measures their steps and plays the long game. People who rely on manipulation or confrontation are comfortable when you are overwhelmed. But the moment you approach them with strategy instead of emotion, their whole plan collapses. They don't know how to fight someone who refuses to fight in the way they expect. You gained control the moment you refused to let anger make your decisions for you. You chose discipline over impulse. You chose self-respect over reaction. That change made them uncomfortable, and that discomfort made them talk. You made them realize the version of you they trained themselves to handle no longer exists. What they feared was not your response, it was your transformation. They saw someone they could once provoke transform into someone who studies, plans, and acts with intention. That level of growth threatens anyone who depends on your emotional reactions to feel powerful. That's why they kept talking. They weren't discussing your past. They were trying to understand your upgrade. Number 2, you made history because you refused to participate in the fate they tried to script for you. People love writing stories about others. They create assumptions, predictions, and outcomes in their minds, and then expect you to follow the script like a character who doesn't have free will. They thought they already understood how your life would unfold. They mentally placed limits on you, boxed you in, and convinced themselves they had already seen your final chapter. They expected you to break down exactly where they thought you would, give up at the point they believed you couldn't handle, and remain stuck in the place they felt most comfortable seeing you. But you didn't follow their script. You didn't act out the role they assigned you. You didn't collapse in the scene where they planned your downfall. You rewrote your own story while they were busy gossiping about the old plot. That's the part that rattled them the most, your refusal to repeat the same patterns they were counting on. They expected a familiar ending, but you gave them a plot twist they weren't prepared for. Your strength came from the decision to not settle for the version of you they had accepted. You didn't allow their predictions to become your reality. Instead, you fought for the future that felt aligned with who you truly were becoming. You refused to let their expectations shape your self-image. That alone broke the cycle they tried to trap you in. You made history because you did something most people never do. You interrupted the generational storyline that told you to stay small, silent, or defeated. You chose healing over repeating old pain. You chose growth over familiarity. You chose to rise in a direction no one anticipated. They underestimated the power of someone who decides to write their own destiny. They mistook your silence for surrender. They mistook your setbacks for finality. They mistook your patience for weakness. And while they were busy discussing your supposed limits, you were quietly preparing to surpass them. Your refusal to live the fate they scripted forced them to face a truth they didn't want to admit. Your life was never theirs to predict. It was yours to redefine. Number 3, they were loud because your evolution exposed how little they've changed. The truth no one likes to admit is that people become uncomfortable when someone they underestimated outgrows them. It's one thing to see a stranger level up, but it's a different sting when it's someone they thought would always remain beneath them. Your growth confronted them with a reality they weren't prepared to face. While you were evolving, they were recycling the same habits, the same excuses, and the same stories they've been telling themselves for years. Your evolution made them aware of their own stagnation, and people don't handle that kind of awareness quietly. They talked loudly, excessively, and dramatically because the noise helped them avoid facing themselves. The louder they discussed your life, the easier it was to ignore their lack of progress in theirs. You became the distraction they desperately needed to avoid looking in the mirror. Every step forward you made highlighted the steps they never took. Your healing exposed the wounds they refused to address. Your discipline revealed their laziness. Your growth showed them the price of staying comfortable for too long. And rather than admit they didn't evolve, they turned your progress into a topic, a debate, a spectacle. They weren't shocked by your rise. They were embarrassed by their lack of movement. It felt unfair to them that someone who started in pain could surpass people who started with advantages. It created a quiet panic. If you could change, that meant they could have changed too. Your growth became proof that their stagnation wasn't fate. It was a choice. Talking about you was easier than changing themselves. Criticizing you was simpler than confronting their own unmet potential. So they kept your name alive in conversations, exaggerating your past and questioning your present, all to convince themselves they weren't falling behind. But the truth stood clear. Your evolution didn't expose them because you were trying to. It exposed them because they weren't growing. And nothing makes people talk faster than realizing the person they looked down on is now living at a level they never reached. Number 4, your fight back was silent warfare. You changed your internal ecosystem, and it killed their influence. Your greatest comeback didn't happen in public. It didn't happen in an argument, a confrontation, or a dramatic scene. It happened privately, internally, in the quiet places where real transformation begins. You didn't fight people. You fought the parts of yourself that once gave them power. You realized that the real battle was never about what they said or did. It was about the unhealed wounds inside you that reacted to everything they threw your way. You started addressing the pain that made you over-explain. You dealt with the insecurities that made you tolerate disrespect. You confronted the traumas that made you accept behavior you knew you didn't deserve. And slowly you began removing every internal entry point they depended on. They didn't lose power because they changed. They lost power because you did. When you healed the parts of yourself that craved their approval, their opinions lost their ability to shake you. When you strengthened your boundaries, their manipulation stopped working. When you learned emotional control, their attempts to provoke you fell flat. You rebuilt your inner world in a way that made their tactics useless. You didn't argue your worth, you grew into it. You didn't demand respect. You carried yourself in a way that made disrespect impossible. You didn't announce your healing. You lived it so clearly that people felt the shift without you saying a word. That's why your fight back looked silent from the outside. You weren't performing your transformation. You were becoming someone their chaos could no longer reach. Your inner change created a new reality they couldn't function in. The version of you they succeeded against no longer existed. They were trying to use old tricks on someone with new strength. They were trying to trigger wounds that no longer bled. They were trying to access doors you welded shut. This was the silent warfare that won the battle. Your internal upgrade. No shouting, no proving, no chasing. Just healing, leveling up and evolving to a point where their influence simply evaporated. Number 5, you made history by turning trauma into data instead of identity. What set you apart wasn't that you went through pain. Everyone does. What made your rise historic was how you processed it. Most people take their trauma and wear it like a permanent badge. They replay the same events for years, letting the hurt become the reason for every limitation, every reaction, every wall they build. They anchor their whole personality to what damaged them because it gives them something to justify their bitterness. But you didn't let your pain turn into a personality. You refused to let the worst moments of your life tell you who you were. You looked at your trauma differently. Instead of letting it define you, you studied it. You broke it down the way a researcher breaks down patterns. You paid attention to what triggered you, what influenced you, and what shaped your choices. You didn't just feel the wounds, you examined them. That shift alone separated you from the average person. They let trauma speak for them. You let trauma teach you. You learned which relationships drained you and which ones strengthened you. You saw where your boundaries needed tightening. You recognized your emotional blind spots. You turned every setback into a source of insight, every betrayal into a revelation, and every disappointment into a clue about where you needed more growth. Pain became your data, not your identity. This is why you rose, not simply because you survived, but because you extracted wisdom from what was supposed to break you. You grew sharper, wiser, and more conscious. You learned the mechanics of manipulation, the signs of toxic patterns, and the difference between loyalty and convenience. You saw the hidden lessons that most people ignore because they're too busy feeling wounded to analyze what the wound is trying to reveal. Your history-making moment happened when you decided that trauma would not be the soundtrack of your life. It would be the textbook. And once you mastered the lessons, the pain no longer controlled you. Your mind upgraded, your spirit strengthened, and your decisions became clearer. This is why you stand where others stayed stuck. They lived in their trauma. You learned from yours, and that changed everything. Number 6. What shocked them was not your comeback, but your refusal to shrink back into who they were comfortable fighting. The real disruption wasn't that you rose, it's that you refused to return to the version of yourself they understood. They were ready to deal with the old you, the predictable you, the emotionally triggered you. They rehearsed arguments for a person who no longer existed. They prepared tactics for a mindset you outgrew. They built confidence on the idea that you would never evolve beyond the weaknesses they once exploited. So when you re-emerged as someone sharper, stronger, calmer, and wiser, it wasn't just surprising, it was destabilizing. You became unfamiliar to people who once thought they had you figured out. The old patterns didn't work. The old insults didn't sting. The old manipulation didn't move you. They weren't losing to your comeback. They were losing to your transformation. And that's where the shock really lived. In the realization that the battlefield they trained for no longer matched the version of you standing in front of them. They wanted you at the level where they felt superior. They wanted the version of you who apologized too much, doubted yourself too quickly, reacted too easily, or trusted too blindly. They expected you to return to that identity because it kept them in control. But you came back as someone they couldn't predict or contain, someone who outgrew the environment they thrived in, someone who refused to shrink to make others comfortable. You didn't just upgrade, you became unreachable to people who refused to grow. They were fighting a memory of you, not the present you. And that's why they looked confused, frustrated, even desperate at times. They were swinging at shadows, using strategies meant for a past version of you they secretly hoped would never change. Your new frequency didn't just elevate you, it exposed them. It showed how much they relied on your old self to feel powerful. It revealed how dependent they were on your insecurities to feel important. It proved their confidence was built on the assumption that you'd never outgrow their reach. Your refusal to shrink back forced them to face a truth they didn't want to see. You didn't just come back stronger, you came back untouchable. Number 7. You didn't just fight back. You exposed how fragile their power was the moment you walked away from their battlefield. The turning point wasn't a confrontation or a dramatic showdown. It was the moment you quietly removed yourself from the game they spent so long trying to trap you in. They depended on your reactions more than you ever realized. Every argument, every provocation, every rumor, they all required your participation to stay alive. Your emotions were the fuel. Your attention was the oxygen. Without you responding, the whole thing fell apart faster than they expected. Your detachment was the hit they never recovered from. When you stopped trying to prove yourself, they lost an entire arena of influence. When you stopped explaining yourself, their narrative stopped breathing. When you stopped defending yourself, their accusations lost weight. And when you stopped showing up to the conflict, they were left alone holding weapons that suddenly looked ridiculous. People who thrive on chaos feel powerful only when they can trigger a response. It gives them a sense of control, superiority, and validation. So when you stepped away, they weren't just confused. They were exposed. They had built their confidence on engaging you in battles you didn't need to fight. They believed they understood your patterns well enough to pull you into any storm they created. But the moment you chose peace over participation, you broke the cycle completely. Your exit didn't just silence the noise. It revealed how much of their power was fake, borrowed, and dependent on your involvement. They weren't strong. They simply knew how to distract you. They weren't dominant. They just knew how to provoke you. The moment you walked away, the illusion shattered. You left them arguing with themselves, trying to create chaos without a partner, and scrambling to maintain attention in a battle you no longer acknowledged. Your refusal to respond became the response that hit the hardest. They didn't expect you to realize that the battlefield was designed for their benefit, not yours. By removing yourself, you didn't just win, you changed the entire landscape. Your detachment dismantled everything they built, because without you, their power wasn't power at all. Number 8. You made history by becoming the proof that inner stability is more powerful than outer opposition. Your rise wasn't loud, flashy, or dramatic. It was rooted. And that's what made it historic. People expected you to collapse under pressure the way most do, because the truth is, many people don't fall from what happens to them. They fall from the instability inside them. They depend on praise to feel worthy, attention to feel seen, and external approval to feel grounded. The moment life shakes them, they crumble because there's nothing solid holding them up on the inside. But you didn't build yourself on shaky foundations. You didn't rely on applause or validation to survive. You didn't let people decide how far you could go or what you could handle. You created your own internal infrastructure, piece by piece, lesson by lesson. You built clarity where confusion once lived. You built discipline where chaos once dictated your choices. You built self-trust after years of doubting yourself. You built discernment so sharp that no manipulation could slip past you again. That inner construction made you unshakable. Your stability didn't come from people liking you or supporting you. It came from knowing exactly who you are, what you deserve, and what you're capable of. That alone put you in a category most never reach. It's easy to break someone who lives from the outside in. It's nearly impossible to break someone who lives from the inside out. Your opposition tried everything: gossip, pressure, manipulation, emotional traps. But none of it worked the way they expected. They were aiming at a version of you that no longer existed. Their efforts bounced off the walls of the inner strength you spent years building. They couldn't destabilize you because they didn't create your stability. They had no access to the foundation you built in silence. Your history-making moment wasn't the comeback people could see. It was the inner transformation no one saw happening. You became living proof that a grounded mind, a healed heart, and a disciplined spirit can withstand storms that would destroy anyone relying on the world to hold them together. They couldn't break what they didn't build. They couldn't shake what they never strengthened. And that is exactly why you became untouchable. Number 9, they talked because watching you rise without their permission felt like betrayal to their imagined hierarchy. Some people never admit it out loud, but in their minds, they've already placed themselves above you. They create a quiet ranking system where they believe they're smarter than you, stronger than you, wiser than you, or more deserving than you. They assume you'll always be a few steps behind, needing their guidance, validation, or approval. That unspoken superiority keeps their ego warm. It makes them feel safe, relevant, and important. So when you started rising on your own terms, with your own strength, without anyone's stamp of approval, it shook the very foundation of the identity they built for themselves. You weren't supposed to grow past the point they mentally assigned you. You weren't supposed to evolve into someone they couldn't control or predict. Your progress wasn't just success to them. It was rebellion. It was a violation of a hierarchy they thought would last forever. They didn't see your rise as natural. They saw it as disrespectful. In their mind, you stepped out of line. You broke an imaginary order they depended on to feel superior. You rising meant they had to question their own stagnation. And instead of doing that, they chose to talk. Talking was easier than admitting they were wrong about you. Talking was easier than accepting that you never needed their permission to elevate. Talking was easier than confronting their jealousy. Your growth forced them to face the fact that the ranking system wasn't real. It was just a mental illusion they used to feel significant. And nothing threatens a person with a superiority complex more than someone they counted out becoming someone they can't keep up with. That's why your rise felt like betrayal to them. You disrupted the story they created where they were always ahead. You proved that their imagined position over you was nothing but fantasy. You showed them that the power they thought they had wasn't real. Your success didn't offend them because you succeeded. It offended them because you did it without asking them to stay on top. Number 10, your comeback was historic because you didn't try to prove them wrong. You proved yourself right. The turning point in your story wasn't about winning an argument, clapping back, or forcing people to see your worth. You took a completely different route, one most people never choose because it requires patience, discipline, and self-belief. You stopped trying to convince anyone of anything. You stopped explaining your side. You stopped chasing clarity from those committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you poured everything into becoming the version of yourself you always knew you could be. You didn't waste energy correcting their lies because you understood something powerful. Truth doesn't need to scream when it can simply exist. You invested in your growth until it stood taller than any rumor. You built a life so solid, so aligned, so consistent, that their accusations eventually looked like background noise compared to the person you became. People didn't stop believing the lies because you argued better. They stopped believing because your results invalidated every false story told about you. You proved yourself right by becoming undeniable. Your evolution revealed the gap between who you actually are and the character they created in their heads. While they were busy talking, you were busy building. While they rehearsed old narratives, you were writing new chapters. And as you kept rising, something interesting happened. The world started to see the mismatch. Their claims couldn't compete with your growth. Their bitterness couldn't overshadow your progress. Their storyline couldn't survive the truth you were living. Your comeback became historic not because it was loud, but because it was real. You didn't return trying to clear your name. You returned embodying a version of yourself that made every accusation irrelevant. You let your actions dismantle their narratives. You let your character speak where words weren't necessary. You let your transformation handle what your explanations never needed to. In the end, proving them wrong was never the point. Proving yourself right was enough to change everything. Number 11, you made history not by winning a battle, but by learning how to never need the battlefield again. What made your rise so shocking was that you didn't win by overpowering anyone. You won by outgrowing the entire environment where the fight was happening. Most people stay trapped because they keep responding to the same provocations, the same narratives, the same emotional triggers. You broke the cycle by no longer being a participant in a game that was designed to drain you. You realized that real strength isn't about beating the opponent. It's about making the opponent irrelevant to your growth. You didn't chase revenge, validation, or the urge to prove anyone wrong. You reached a level of emotional maturity where their opinions simply didn't qualify as something that needed to be addressed. You stopped seeing them as enemies and started seeing them as outdated chapters. Their tactics couldn't land because you no longer lived in the mental neighborhood where they had influence. You became a different version of yourself, unavailable for chaos, uninterested in drama, and immune to the emotional bait that once pulled you into conflict. The fact that you no longer needed the battlefield was the victory itself. You didn't just step away, you rose above. You didn't just move on, you upgraded your internal world so much that the old external battles felt too small for the person you became. From your new level, their behavior looked juvenile, their attempts looked predictable, and their noise lost its meaning. You learned the art of elevating instead of engaging. People aren't used to that. They're used to fights, comebacks, clapbacks, and visible displays of retaliation. You broke the pattern by refusing to shrink yourself into a version that needed to respond. Your evolution was the loudest statement you could make. It showed that peace isn't weakness. It's a sign that the war is no longer worth your time. You didn't destroy them. You simply outgrew the environment where they existed. That's how you made history. Number 12, you didn't make noise. You made impact, and impact echoes longer than drama. What stunned them wasn't anything you said. It was everything you became. You didn't compete in their little arena of noise, exaggeration, and theatrics. You chose a different path, one where results speak louder than reactions, and where personal evolution holds more weight than temporary arguments. Drama always burns out because it feeds on attention, and attention is unstable. But impact stays, settles, roots itself into people's awareness, and grows legs of its own. And that's exactly what your rise did. While they were busy trying to stir chaos, you were busy cultivating outcomes. You didn't waste time trying to defend yourself or match their energy. You put your energy into creating something real, something solid, something that couldn't be dismissed with rumors or twisted narratives. And that act alone shook their entire foundation. People expect you to clap back, break down, or play into the story they created for you. You robbed them of that satisfaction by producing results instead of reactions. Drama craves an audience, but achievement builds a legacy. The impact you made started changing conversations. People stopped asking what happened and started asking how you did it. They stopped repeating gossip and started observing your growth. Even the ones who counted you out had to update their opinions because your progress wouldn't let them stay comfortable with the lies they told themselves. Gossip has a short shelf life, but transformation forces people to adjust their entire perspective. Your growth didn't just silence the noise, it exposed it. When someone elevates, the low-level chatter becomes obvious for what it truly is: irrelevant, insecure, and rooted in fear. And that's why the talking never stopped. They're still trying to make sense of how you managed to rise without participating in the negativity. They're still replaying their choices while your results continue to overshadow their narratives. In the end, they made noise, but you made history, and history is what people remember. Number 13, you fought back by mastering a level of accountability they've never met. Your strength didn't come from acting flawless. It came from being brutally honest with yourself in a way most people avoid. Accountability became your armor, not because it made you perfect, but because it made you self-aware. You confronted the parts of yourself that were wounded, reactive, or easily influenced. You took responsibility for patterns you didn't create, but still had to break. That kind of inner work is rare, and it's threatening to anyone who relies on blaming others to avoid their own reflection. Most people try to win battles by pointing outward. You won by looking inward. You sat with truths that would make others crumble, the habits that kept you stuck, the fears you inherited, the expectations you absorbed, the unhealed places that made you vulnerable to manipulation. Instead of running from those truths, you dealt with them one by one. That work rebuilt your foundation. It cleared your thinking. It made your reactions sharper, cleaner, and harder to influence. When someone knows themselves at that level, nobody can tell them who they are or twist their emotions with the same old tactics. What scared them was not that you changed, It was that you became self-led. You stopped responding from pain and started responding from clarity. You didn't need their approval, excuses, or explanations anymore. You recognized your own patterns faster than they could exploit them. You owned your flaws before others could weaponize them. That made you untouchable in a way they never saw coming. Accountability gave you a quiet power. The more you faced your shadows, the less power their shadows had over you. They couldn't guilt you, pressure you, or manipulate you using the old entry points. You shut down the emotional backdoors they used, not by fighting them, but by upgrading yourself. Self-honesty became your boundary and your protection. That's why they feared your growth. You weren't just stronger, you were too self-aware for their chaos to survive around you. Number 14. Your transformation destabilized every person who depended on your old self to feel superior. Your growth didn't just elevate you, it disrupted the entire ecosystem of people who were comfortable benefiting from your old wounds. Some individuals only felt confident because you were shrinking. They only felt wise because you doubted yourself. They only felt powerful because you second-guessed your voice. When you started healing, when you began trusting yourself, when your confidence quietly returned, it threw their internal balance completely off. They weren't ready for a new version of you because their control was built on the old version. Your transformation didn't just surprise them, it exposed their dependency. The insecure you made them feel secure. The unsure you made them feel knowledgeable. The naive you made them feel dominant. Healing removed those dynamics, and without them, they were forced to face their own hollowness. They couldn't handle the upgrade because your evolution highlighted what they refused to fix within themselves. Suddenly, the tricks they used didn't work. The comments that once shook you fell flat. The attitudes that once intimidated you lost their effect. They realized they weren't dealing with the same person, and that realization unraveled them. Growth is uncomfortable for those who refuse to grow. When you stepped into stability, you unknowingly shattered the comfort they found in your instability. When you stopped needing validation, they no longer had leverage. When you became more grounded, they could no longer play the hero or the authority figure. Your transformation didn't just elevate you, it stripped them of the imaginary rank they built over your insecurities. They weren't upset because you changed. They were upset because they could no longer predict you, manipulate you, or stand above you. Your evolution forced them to confront their lack of evolution, and that is destabilizing in a way most people never admit. You didn't rise to hurt them, you rose to free yourself. But freedom always disrupts those who were comfortable with your captivity. A comeback like yours wasn't loud, messy, or fueled by the need to prove anything. It was built through transformation so profound that the old version of you couldn't have survived it. Everything they tried to use against you became the very material that shaped your resilience. You didn't rise because you were protected from adversity. You rose because you learned to process adversity differently than anyone expected. You stopped letting pain define you and started letting it instruct you. You stopped fighting enemies and started redesigning yourself. You stopped seeking approval and started cultivating internal power that wasn't up for negotiation. And that is where history was made. They talked because they saw something they didn't think was possible. Someone breaking patterns without breaking down. Someone healing wounds without becoming bitter. Someone evolving without needing applause. While they obsessed over the version of you they thought they could manage, you quietly dismantled every doorway they once walked through. You became too stable for their chaos, too insightful for their manipulation, and too upgraded for their old strategies to land. They prepared for a battle, but you prepared for a new life. They focused on beating you. You focused on becoming someone they could no longer reach. Your journey wasn't a comeback story. It was a recalibration of identity purpose and self-control. You didn't return to the field they were waiting on. You entered a higher arena where their opinions and tactics lost all power. That's the kind of evolution that forces people to talk, to question, to replay their choices, and to confront the truth. You didn't just win, you advanced. You didn't just survive, you outgrew. You didn't just fight back, you changed the entire landscape they thought they controlled. If this message spoke to your spirit, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a comment, and share this with someone who needs this truth today. Your support helps this message reach the people who need it most, because your story is bigger than a comeback. It's a blueprint for transformation. God bless you.